Every year, on a Thursday in December, the best badminton players in the world from China, Indonesia, Japan, Denmark arrive in Lucknow to compete in a tournament. Flags go up, stadiums fill, a name echoes across the announcer's PA system, repeated hundreds of times over several days until it becomes just background noise to the people who've heard it their whole lives. That name is Syed Modi. What the crowds in those stadiums rarely talk about, what the gleaming trophy and the BWF World Tour branding don't mention, is that Syed Modi was 25 years old when two men shot him dead outside a stadium gate in Lucknow on a July evening in 1988. He was India's greatest badminton player of his era. He was a railway employee's son from a sugar mill town nobody had ever heard of. He was a husband who was betrayed. He was a father of a 2-month-old daughter he would never see grow up. And then, one evening, he was a body in a pool of blood. This is the story of Syed Modi, and it's also the story of everything India let get away. Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Aishwarya.
And I'm Aryan.
And the case that I have for you today is one of the most heartbreaking tales of Indian crime that I had never heard of.
Aishwarya, when you told me you'd be covering this case, the only thing I could think about was how prescient this particular story is, because Lakshya Sen, the Indian badminton player, just defeated the Chinese world #1 player. And so everybody's been talking about our rise in badminton, not knowing that our history with badminton can go far back, and it goes as back as this man, Syed Modi.
It does. India, I think, really has in its heyday had some formidable badminton players. I think it's one of those sports, it doesn't get enough limelight in terms of Indian sportsmen representing the sport. I hope this story is a way of telling this man's story, but also a way of reminding a young Indian audience of what badminton meant to India, what an era in badminton looked like back in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s.
While I was a house level, intra-school level badminton player, I have fond memories of badminton because it was the game me and my friends used to play while bunking sports. I mean, now pickle and paddle are all the hype, but badminton used to be that refuge for us, and I've always had an affinity for racket sports.
It really was for some reason to all kids. I think a lot of our colonies in India, as well as societies, our gated communities, a lot of them had inbuilt badminton courts. The one I'm in now, under almost every building, there's no other sports facility. There's one field where people will set up cricket and whatnot, but under every building there is a badminton net. So I think that it's kind of been a part of a lot of our childhoods.
Yeah, and if you want to see Aishwarya play badminton, which is entertaining in its own right,
You've never
go become
seen
a
me.
patron. I've played badminton with you, Aishwarya. You suck. My point being that go become a patron to get access to really cool extra stuff. It may or may not include Aishwarya playing badminton, but it sure as hell will include many awesome things, and it's a way to support us and run the engines here at Desi Studios. And before I can let Aishwarya get in a word edgewise, Aishwarya, can you get started with the story for the day?
Kudos to everything Aryan has said, but over my dead body will you all see a clip of me playing badminton available exclusively on our Patreon. But if I change my mind, link in the description. The 28th of July 1988 was a Thursday. Lucknow in July is the kind of hot that makes you want to stay indoors. Thick, humid, almost oppressive. But 25-year-old Syed Modi was not the kind of man who skipped practice. He arrived at KD Singh Babu Stadium that evening the same way he arrived every evening. He trained, he ran the drills, hit the shuttles with his badminton racket, worked on the things he had always worked on. His training partners that evening later told reporters that there was nothing unusual about him. He seemed fine. After practice ended, as was his custom, he had a cup of tea at the canteen near the stadium gate with other boys, the usual post-practice ritual, the kind of thing you don't think twice about. And then he got on his scooter. As Syed Modi drove out of the stadium gate, two men who had been waiting for him, watching his every move, moved in closer and just opened fire. 5 bullets from close range. His training partners, still inside the compound, still finishing their tea, heard the shots. One of them, a canteen worker named Premchand Yadav, ran out through the gate and by that point found Modi on the ground. He saw 2 men running towards a white Maruti car, which then sped off in the direction of Raebareli. Premchand raised an alarm. Stadium officials came out and screams echoed in the air. But the people who surrounded Syed Modi's bleeding body knew he was already beyond saving. He was taken to King George Medical College Hospital in Lucknow, where he was pronounced dead. He was 25 years old. His daughter was 2 months old. His daughter, whom he may or may not have even believed was his, was 2 months old in Mumbai. The news broke across India that night and the next morning with a force that is hard to describe today if you don't live through it. Remember, this was 1988. There were no mobile phones, no social media, no real-time breaking news feed. People learned about it from the radio, from All India Radio bulletins, from the morning newspapers that day. And still, by the time daybreak came, there were crowds outside King George Hospital. Crowds for a badminton player. And that tells you something about who Syed Modi was and what he meant to people, to a country that didn't have enough sporting heroes and couldn't afford to lose the ones it did have. A journalist from the Times of India's Lucknow bureau, someone who had followed Modi in life, recalled refusing to print a photograph of his body on the mortuary table. Quote, "Instead, we published a collage of his photos in better times, including a snap of a jump smash he was famous for and a picture of him and his wife reading the Times of India lovingly on the bed in their house." End quote. That image, the jump smash, is a good representation of what was lost. Not just the athlete, but the man. His body was brought to KD Singh Babu Stadium the following morning, the same stadium where he had been killed the night before, so that tributes could be paid. And then it was taken to Gorakhpur, to the graveyard where he was buried. The tomb bore his real name, the name the world never used, Syed Mehdi Hassan Zaidi, in Arabic. His brother Bakar still visits that grave 2 or 3 times a year. He has done so every year since 1988. Quote, "Modi was the youngest among the 8 siblings and was very dear to all of us," Bakar said decades later. "I'm so proud that he touched great heights and brought so much glory to the country. But I cannot stop feeling the pain of losing him," end quote. He was talking about someone who had been gone for over 30 years, yet he sounded like someone he had lost yesterday. But to understand the Syed Modi case, we have to start somewhere most people skip, with that name itself. Because like I said, the name on his grave, carved in Arabic, is not Syed Modi. His real name was Syed Mehdi Hassan Zaidi. And the reason the world knows him as Modi is almost embarrassingly simple. When his father took him as a young boy to enroll in an English medium school in Gorakhpur, the teacher on duty did not know how to pronounce the word Mehdi. So he wrote Syed Modi instead. And nobody, not his parents, not his siblings, not Syed himself, ever thought to correct it. The name stuck. And then it became famous. And then it became a tournament. And then it became a stadium.
Aishwarya, you know I have a one could call a penchant for etymology, and just that story behind one's name can reveal so much character about their roots and their family. I'm surprised that Mehdi was a name. I mean, I can see how it's difficult to pronounce, but if you're in India, I guess people can pronounce Mehdi.
I think it depends on what tiny part of Gorakhpur you're in. Because India is so diverse, obviously this is such a simplistic point to make, but India is so diverse in its little pockets geographically, language-wise, colloquially, that maybe just that little tiny part of Gorakhpur where he went, it was not a common surname perhaps. I don't know, but it is very fascinating.
I wonder what his parents would have named him differently today had he been born, because it definitely wouldn't have been Modi.
That little administrative accident is such a good introduction to the man actually, because Syed Modi's entire life was defined by circumstances that were not entirely his own making, situations he stepped into rather than created, and yet somehow he always made them more than what they were. He was born on the 31st of December 1962 in Sardarnagar, a small town in Gorakhpur district in Uttar Pradesh, about 5 kilometers from Chauri Chaura, a name we all recognize from our history books because of its role in the non-cooperation movement. His father, Syed Mir Hassan Zaidi, worked at the Sardarnagar sugar mill, and his mother was a homemaker, and the two had 8 children in total, 6 sons and 2 daughters, of which Syed was the youngest. The family was not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, but the older brothers were educated and working, and they contributed towards family expenses. And then it became clear that the youngest had something extraordinary in him on a badminton court. And so the whole family pooled together to make sure he could pursue it. That something became apparent young. By the time Syed was 14 years old, he was already the junior national badminton champion of India. 14! He had been coached by a man named K. Bhandari, who would go on to become the chief badminton coach at the National Institute of Sports in Patiala. Bhandari recognized what he was looking at early and made sure Syed had the right training environment to grow. And grow he did. To build endurance, Syed incorporated basketball and cycling into his regimen. This was a young man who took his craft seriously, who understood that natural talent was a starting point, but not the destination. In 1980, just turned 18 and newly eligible to compete at the senior national level, Syed Modi did something that nobody expected. He dethroned Prakash Padukone.
No way. This story is such a blend of different characters that we have
Different
heard of on
worlds.
the surface, but we didn't know there was these stories behind them. Well, no, at least I did not.
Neither did I. I mean, you see those Instagram posts about you didn't know that these two people in the world lived at the same time. And sometimes they're really crazy. Like the pyramids were built around the same time, like some other Einstein was alive. I'm just giving an example. I have no idea if that's true or not. But this feels like that, like converging of two worlds. And I'm like, oh, crazy that these two worlds at some point were the same.
Your analogy of Einstein and pyramids together will rightfully be trolled in the comments. But
Go
for
ahead.
those that don't know, Prakash Padukone is the father of Deepika Padukone and a badminton legend in his own right.
Right. Now, like Aryan said, we need to understand what this means. Prakash Padukone was not just a good player, he was the defining Indian badminton player of his generation. The first Indian to win the All England Championship, the national championship from 1971, all the way through 1979. He was the ceiling. He was what the sport looked like at its highest. And this 18-year-old boy from Gorakhpur walked onto a court in Vijayawada and beat him 15-9, 15-8 in straight sets. And the baton passed, just like that. And then Syed Modi did not let go of it. He went on to win the National Badminton Championship every year for the next 8 years, 1980, 81, 82, 83, 84, all the way to 87. 8 consecutive titles. A record that to this day, nobody has matched. He never lost to another Indian player in that entire stretch. His jump smash was described by commentators and fellow players as electric, a shot so fast and so unexpected that by the time an opponent saw it coming, it had already landed. His stamina, his recovery between points, people who watched him play at his peak describe it the way people describe watching something rare, something you know you're lucky to be in the same room as. Internationally, the year 1982 was his peak. He won a gold medal at the Commonwealth Games in Brisbane, beating England's Nick Yates in a scoreline that tells you everything about the kind of fighter he was. 7-15, 15-5, 15-7. He lost the first set decisively, and then he came back and won the next two without mercy. A few months later, at the Asian Games in Delhi, on home soil, he won bronze, finishing behind only Han Jian of China and Lim Swee King of Indonesia, two of the greatest shuttlers in the history of the sport. He received the Arjuna Award, India's highest sporting honour for athletes, in 1981, and then went on to win the Austrian International twice in 83 and 84. Then he won the USSR International in 85. He was, by every possible measure, India's dominant force in badminton for a full decade. Now, believe it or not, on top of all of this, he also had a job. One of the details about Syed Modi that I keep coming back to because it tells you so much about who he was and where he came from is that he was an employee of the Northeastern Railway. He got that posting in Gorakhpur after his early success, and it was the railways that supported his badminton career, that gave him a salary and a structure within which to pursue what he loved. In 1982, when his new coach felt that Lucknow offered better training facilities, he was transferred there. There he trained at the KD Singh Babu Stadium, where he practiced every day with the same routine, the same discipline, the same commitment he had since he was a child in Gorakhpur. And after practice, he built a habit. A small, completely ordinary habit of stopping at the canteen near the stadium gate for a drink, a Coke or a chai, before heading home on his scooter. That habit would eventually become the last thing he did before he was killed. But before we get to that evening in July 1988 again, we need to talk about what happened in Beijing in 1978, 10 years before the night he was killed. Because that trip, that one tournament, that one encounter set in motion everything that followed. In 1978, the 16-year-old junior national champion was selected to represent India at an international tournament in Beijing. He was already exceptional. He was also, by every account, a young man with a quiet kind of confidence. Not arrogant, not flashy, but certain of himself in the way that only people who have worked very hard for a very long time can be. On that same trip, in the women's team, was a girl his own age. Her name was Amita Kulkarni. Amita was in almost every conceivable way Saeed's opposite on paper. She was from an affluent Maharashtrian family in Mumbai. She had grown up in cosmopolitan South Bombay, English educated, in circles where the gap between her world and a sugar mill worker's family in a small UP town would have seemed enormous. She was Hindu, he was Muslim. She was a city girl, he was a small town boy who had remade himself through sheer will. The Supreme Court of India, decades later, would record the beginning of their relationship in very simple, almost clinical words. Quote, there rose intimacy between the two. What that means in plain language is that two 16-year-olds on a national sports trip in Beijing fell in love. And they stayed in love for 6 years. That's not nothing. 6 years is a long time to hold on to something that everyone around you is telling you to let go of. And both families were opposed to the relationship from the start. Not just mildly, not just with reservations, but fervently, actively, almost desperately opposed. The religious difference was the loudest objection. But the CBI report that would later dissect his marriage from the outside also pointed to something subtler. The concern that two intensely ambitious, competitive, achievement-driven professional athletes building a life together would create not a partnership, but a competition. A war of small resentments, a race neither of them could stop running. Those concerns, it turns out, were not wrong. But Syed and Amita didn't want to hear any of it. In May of 1984, they got married in a hastily arranged registry ceremony. They did it quickly, almost defiantly, in the face of their family's opposition. And here is a detail that, in retrospect, feels like something a novelist would invent to make a point. The wedding took place at the home of a man named Sanjay Singh. Sanjay Singh. Remember that name. Actually, let me tell you who he was first. Because Sanjay Singh was not just some mutual friend. He was, at the time of the wedding, the Raja of Amethi, a man from an erstwhile royal family, immensely wealthy, with a 450-year-old palace called Bhupati Bhavan as his home. More than that, he was a sitting politician, a member of the Uttar Pradesh Legislative Assembly, a former state minister for sports, forest and animal husbandry from 1982 to 1985. And perhaps most critically, he was a close friend and classmate of then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. Amethi, the constituency Sanjay Gandhi had his roots in, was the same constituency Rajiv Gandhi represented in Parliament. The neighbouring constituency of Rai Bareli had been held by Indira Gandhi. These were not coincidences of geography, they were the overlapping circles of power. Sanjay Singh lived and breathed in that air. He also had a wife, a woman named Garima Singh, and the two had 2 children together. This matters, and not in a small way. According to the CBI's later investigation, Sanjay Singh first met Amita in 1984, the same year she married Syed Modi. But what started as a friendship between the couple and this powerful, well-connected man slowly became something else. By the time Syed began to sense it, by the time the marriage started to visibly crack, Amita and Sanjay's relationship had turned into a full-blown affair. Now, details of this affair are disputed and we'll get into it in a minute, but what is undisputed is this. Syed Modi's performance on the court, that extraordinary, seemingly unstoppable machine of a man who had won 8 consecutive national titles, began to fall. In 1988, for the first time in his career, he lost the national championship. The first time in 8 years. Personal turmoil will do that to an athlete, even the best ones. And while his game was falling apart, his wife was pregnant. Matters came to a head during this pregnancy. The CBI report noted that Modi had come to suspect that the child Amita was carrying was not his. Amita, rather than reassuring him, seems to have chosen not to. She went to her parents' home in Mumbai for the delivery, which was maybe understandable on its own, but considering the circumstances in her own home, it was yet another blow to Syed.
Okay, so I'm just doing some housekeeping, Ishwarya. We know that they met in 78 and that's when the romance sort of began.
Correct.
We also know that in 84 they got married and in 88 she was pregnant. So
Correct.
if there was an affair, which very likely was the case, it was definitely on in about 88. Do we have any clarity as to what the timeline of when the affair began, when Modi started suspecting her, and when Modi actually found out for certain that she is in an affair?
So the thing about this case is that a lot of this information exists. It's out there somewhere in this world because Amita, through the course of her marriage and this affair, wrote diaries, alleged affair, and we'll get to that, but wrote extensive diaries about this. And so this timeline exists in those diaries. It's just that those diaries haven't been made publicly available. What we know is that Sanjay Singh has entered the couple's life in 84, which is the year they've gotten married. And sometime after that the affair has began. We have a 4-year time between 84 and 88, which is the year that Syed Modi was killed. So sometime in that 4-year time span is where it took off, but we don't know the exact details.
And before this kid, they've not had a kid, right? This is the
No, they
first kid
haven't.
they're having.
Right.
And lastly, is do we know why she cheated on him? Was it marital problems that had been manifesting for a while? Was it his absence? Was it just the loss of love? Was it lust? Like, do we know what led her to that?
We actually don't know that, but we're going to come to her diary again and the way it's been described by people who have read the diary. So, for example, the CBI joint director, whoever who have read the diary, the way they describe it, the way it played out in court, it presents the image of a really troubled marriage, and not in a regular sense, not in the sense that there is infighting and there are two people who are unhappy, but in the sense that there are two people who are egging each other's jealousy, and there are two people who are poking at each other, one more than the other, one is poking more than the other, one is making the other jealous more than the other, but it just seems evil and vindictive in a way that even bad marriages don't have to be, so it's just an odd dynamic, and I'd love to hear your thoughts when we do get into it. Now, in May 1988, a daughter was born to Syed and Amita. Amita gave her the Hindu name Akanksha, and then she left the infant with her parents in Mumbai and returned to Lucknow to resume her badminton practice as soon as possible, according to her account. Syed and Amita were now in Lucknow again. The baby was in Mumbai. The marriage was, by all accounts, in its final chapter. And then, 2 months later, Syed Modi was dead outside the KD Singh Babu Stadium on the 28th of July 1988. In the days after the murder, the Uttar Pradesh police took the case first. But within 2 days, the Rajiv Gandhi government, then in power at the centre, had transferred it to the CBI, the Central Bureau of Investigation. The official reasoning was that a case of this complexity and national significance requires the CBI's resources. But here is the thing about that transfer that nobody could miss and everyone speculated at the time. One of the men about to get involved in the case was Sanjay Singh, a close friend, an old classmate, a political ally of Rajiv Gandhi himself. The CBI in India reports to the central government. The central government was led by Rajiv Gandhi. You can draw your own conclusions about the structural complications that this created, but to be fair to what the CBI did, they moved fast. And here is what they uncovered very quickly into their investigation. They uncovered piece number 1, which is the diary. Amita kept a personal diary like I mentioned, but what I didn't mention is that she knew that Syed sometimes read it when she was away from home. This was not a secret between them. And knowing that, she wrote about Sanjay in it. Deliberately, in detail. The diary described meetings between them, the emotional and physical nature of their relationship. It described what one reporter who reviewed the circulated extracts later characterized as, quote, nights of ecstasy and unusual rapture, end quote. Sanjay Singh was referred to in the diary as S2, while Syed was called S1, codenames childishly easy to decode. The CBI found the diary during their raid and began circulating extracts from it to the press the very next day. That detail, the speed with which they went public with it, would later be used by the defense to argue that the CBI was engaged in trial by media rather than legitimate investigation. But the contents of the diary itself were not fabricated by the CBI. Amita never disputed that the diary was hers or that she wrote those entries. Her explanation, offered after the murder, was this. Quote, I had used my flight of imagination to write certain things in the diary only to tease him. Modi had read every line I had written, and every time I wanted to tease him, I used to refer to the diary. Had it been a record of my affair with anybody, I was not dumb enough to retain it so that the CBI could build up a case. I could have easily concealed it in any one of the 17 days after the murder when the CBI raided my house and found it. End quote. That is her full explanation on record. And I want to be fair to it before I push back on it, because there is a surface level logic here that a defense lawyer could find useful. If the diary really was evidence of a motive for murder, she would not have left it in the house. She would have destroyed it. The fact that it was there means either she was not guilty of conspiracy or she had grossly miscalculated.
Aishwarya, that argument can be applied to literally any piece of
Any
evidence
mistake.
found in any murder investigation. Any murderer could go, oh, I mean, it's the most childish Agatha Christie plot twist that exists, which is, oh, had I known it, I would have hid it. No, you messed up because you're not a professional murderer. You couldn't keep track of every little thing.
But to be fair, the diary is not a fingerprint that you didn't know exists, right? It's not your shoe print that you left out in the mud that police then went and found. It's a very tangible piece you wrote over many months. It was a formidable part of the falling apart of your marriage in the last few months. It has, if anything, a direct account of your affair. You're saying it's not, but if it is that story, then it is. And you've just let it be. Like, it's a little different than leaving a fingerprint or leaving a shoe print or leaving a hair stand. You know what I'm saying?
I get that. I can also, to me, just the diary in and of itself, if it were to be treated, even if it was like captured within 20 minutes of the murder, right? The diary reeks of smoke that directs me towards a fire that may potentially be uncovered. So firstly, I mean, I don't buy I am writing smut just to make my husband jealous. Maybe
Neither
you
do
were
I.
exaggerating. Maybe you were, and I can totally see the exaggeration, but in a night of ecstasy with whatever little addition she added, direct me to physical intimacy outside her marriage. Now, secondly, to your point of, there is some validity to the fact that it's tangible evidence as opposed to evidence a killer is oblivious to. Aishwarya, to me, 17 days and a surprise raid following 17 days when you are trying to not act like the murderer is pretty fast for an investigation.
For sure.
It's a raid. It's not even like you're being called in for questioning. So in that regards, I mean, while 17 days sound a lot and it's very easy to post hoc say, I had 17 days to hide it, I don't think in those 17 days you knew what was coming your way.
That's 100% true. And also, I think we have a tendency to imagine what 17 days are like to us. As normal working people or as a student, maybe 17 days is so many days where so much is just regular routine days that are passing by slowly. But if this is someone who has committed murder, there's probably so much chaos and confusion in those 17 days. It's not very many days at all. And again, if you don't know a raid is coming, it is probably one of the details you could have missed. So I completely agree with you. I don't necessarily buy obviously I'm smart enough to have destroyed the diary if it meant something more logic.
And you're not just the murderer, you're the wife of the murdered. So your house is filled with relatives and people and action and commotion.
100%.
Your brain could also have been going, I don't want to seem suspicious by trying to, hide something. Like, there's so much going on, like you said. So, yeah, I mean, that's just my, not even devil's advocate, that's my angel's advocate side of this debate.
Like I said, I agree with Aryan. What I want you to sit with is this. The diary described a conflict Amita felt between S1 and S2. The diary described the pull in two directions, the emotional weight of that pull, the specific details of her encounters with S2. These were not a few vague references. Like Aryan said, it was detailed, it was sustained. And she's telling us she wrote all of it to tease her husband of a man she says she was not having an affair with. She's telling us that her imagination produced descriptions of nights of ecstasy with a specific man, a man who was also named on real pages of this diary as a creative exercise in marital provocation. Even if you accept this explanation, you have to reckon with what this tells you about the condition of that marriage. She was writing fabricated details of an affair in her diary, knowing her husband would read them as a form of deliberate emotional torture. That's not a marriage in trouble, that's a marriage in active warfare. Now, piece 2 that the CBI uncovers are the love letters. Beyond the diary, the CBI also found multiple love letters exchanged between Sanjay Singh and Amita Modi. These were not unilateral, they were correspondence, letters going in both directions between the politician and the athlete, describing the nature and depth of their relationship. The letters, according to investigators and journalists who reviewed them at the time, revealed what one account described as, quote, a tale of passion. They were used to support the CBI's position that this was not an imagined affair or a tease or a flight of fancy. It was real, it was mutual, and it had been ongoing. In court, the defense's response to the letters was essentially the same as their response to the diary. These letters proved intimacy, perhaps. They proved that two people had romantic feelings for each other, but they did not prove that those feelings translated into a conspiracy to commit murder. And on that narrow point, the defense was not entirely wrong. A love letter is not a murder order. The gap between the two is where this entire case eventually rests and will collapse. Piece 3 that the CBI also uncovered was Garima Singh's letter. They found this letter written by Garima Singh, who's Sanjay's first wife, to Sanjay himself, basically reprimanding him for the affair. Garima had written to her husband directly, confronting him about his relationship with Amita. We don't publicly know the exact contents of this letter, but it's significant for a few reasons. First, it establishes that the affair was not just a CBI theory or a newspaper rumor. It was real enough that the man's own wife knew about it and was writing to him about it. Second, it places the affair firmly within the domestic reality of at least three people's lives: Syed's, Amita's, and Garima's. Eventually, Sanjay and Garima even filed for divorce. But after the divorce proceedings were over, Garima would go on to say that the divorce filings were a fraud. She would spend the next 3 decades fighting in court for her legal right as Sanjay's first, and she argued, only legitimate wife. She eventually won. Both the Allahabad High Court and the Supreme Court declared the divorce between her and Sanjay null and void, finding that an impersonator had been used to represent her in the divorce proceedings. Sanjay denied arranging the fraud, but the divorce was struck down regardless. But here's what the public saw in the middle of all of this chaos, and justifiably so. This is a man whose own first wife wrote him a letter about his affair, whose divorce was found to have been fraudulently obtained, and who, and here's the mind-blowing, spine-chilling fact about this case, then married the woman his first wife had written the letter about. Yes, Sanjay and Amita got married in 1995 and are still married to this day. The timeline here is not subtle.
What?
Uh-huh. Isn't that insane? Isn't that insane?
I mean, I am at a loss of words. This is like a dharma film.
It literally is. So many parts of this are like you just had to have made this shit up. Like it couldn't have possibly been true. The whole divorce filed by an impersonator in court is like, what? And then this.
Yeah, I mean, the only silver lining here, and that's also me just fetching for one, is that this is such a passionate love. Like these either people are capable of, you forget what love drives people to do. This is pure like fanatic love and passion throughout this case. It's very Shakespearean in
it is
its
riddled
saga.
with tragedy and
Yeah.
all other human emotion. Yeah. Piece 4 that the CBI found are Syed's own letters written by Syed Modi to Amita. A letter in which, according to those who reviewed it at the time, he spoke about his nearing end, about the terrible pain of having lost the love of his wife. Let me say that again slowly. There is a letter written by Syed Modi to his wife in which he speaks of his impending end. Now, we don't know the exact contents yet again, but there are two ways to read that. One is that Syed was suicidal, that the pain of the marriage had brought him to a place where he was thinking about ending his own life. The other is that Syed had some awareness, however intuited, that his life was in danger. We do not know which reading is correct. The CBI used the letter as part of the picture it was building, a picture of a marriage so corroded, so full of resentment and hopelessness that one party had become expendable to the other. There is also separately a letter written by Amita's own mother regarding the paternity of the baby Akansha. Amita's mother wrote a letter that touched on the question of whose child Akansha actually was, and the CBI found this too. Think about the weight of that for a moment. The child's maternal grandmother, in writing, addressing the question of the child's paternity. This was not just Modi speculating in private, which we know that he did. This was something that had permeated the family enough that letters existed about it.
And going back to the initial argument of, hey, I mean, if I knew there was a investigation coming, I would have gotten rid of the diary. Yeah, that applies to the letters also. What do you have to say about the letters? Like, it's when in an investigation trails are uncovered that despite the best attempt of the assailant, are there for a good investigator to find. And this is a stark example of India's leading investigative body uncovering those. To me, it's as simple as that.
Absolutely. I completely agree. There is just so much evidence in this case that I don't think necessarily is enough to build a case for murder, but it does build a case for an affair between two people. And so I think obviously they are married today. There is no question there was an extramarital affair. I think the diaries that she's trying to deny as imaginary, she's doing that to, I think, distance herself from the murder allegations. But all of this doesn't help. She can distance herself from the murder allegations maybe a little bit, but the affair is undeniable and it existed at the time that she wrote those diaries. Those diaries are not imagination.
I'm curious to see where the evidence for murder comes in, because as much as I am happy to vilify this person in the sense of being a bad partner, you're right. I mean, so far the link from that to murder requires far more evidence, right? I mean, circumstantially, sure. If it was a film, you could easily pinpoint, but this is real life, and you need some kind of witness, DNA evidence, or just confessional statements. I'm curious to see where this case goes in terms of the CBI uncovering that link.
100%. I think that detail between was she just a bad partner or was she a bad partner who was capable of murder is literally the only important question in this case. So the CBI's theory of crime, reconstructed from all of this evidence that I just gave you and all of the testimony that came along with it, went something like this. Sanjay Singh decided Syed Modi had to die. To carry out the killing without direct exposure, he contracted the job to Akhilesh Singh, a sitting MLA from Rai Bareli with a long list of criminal cases against him and a well-established relationship with hired muscle in that part of Uttar Pradesh. Akhilesh then assembled the team, 4 men, each with a designated role. Amar Bahadur Singh and Bhagwati Singh, known as Pappu, were the shooters. Jitendra Singh, known as Tinku, drove the getaway car. Balai Singh was the fourth occupant of the car. The weapon, a .38 bore revolver, was supplied by Pappu to Balai Singh for safekeeping. Balai Singh later made a disclosure statement to this effect in the presence of an independent witness. The revolver and the cartridges were subsequently recovered by investigators. On the evening of July 28, 1988, the 4 men waited in a white Maruti car near the rear gate of KD Singh Babu Stadium. They had been watching his routine. They knew he came out of that gate in the evening. They knew he would be alone. They knew about the scooter. When Syed walked out of the gate after his routine chai at the canteen and got onto his scooter, Amar Bahadur and Pappu opened fire. 5 bullets. After confirming the hit, the 4 men drove away towards Rai Bareli, Akhilesh Singh's home territory. The canteen worker Premchand Yadav saw it happen from the gate. He saw 2 men firing. He saw the Maruti car speed away. He identified Pappu in a test identification parade in jail, and he identified him again before the trial court. His testimony across multiple cross-examinations over multiple years never once wavered. The Allahabad High Court later described it as testimony that stood, quote, unswayed, unyielded, and unbended. And so the CBI arrested all 4 shooters within 10 days of the murder. It then arrested Akhilesh Singh. And then, on the 3rd of September 1988, it arrested Sanjay Singh himself. And 2 days later, it arrested Amita Modi. 7 people total, 1 murder, a complete chain, from the widow and the politician at the top, down through the fixer in Rai Bareli, all the way to the men who pulled the trigger. Or at least, that was how the CBI saw it. Now, the craziest arrest out of all of these 7 was the arrest of Sanjay Singh on the 3rd of September 1988. A Jan Morcha politician, a Rajya Sabha member, the Raja of Amethi, a classmate of the Prime Minister, arrested in Lucknow on charges of conspiracy to commit murder. The New York Times ran the story. The headline was, "A foe of Gandhi is arrested in killing of badminton star." That headline is instructive. It tells you that even internationally, the political dimension of this case was the frame through which it was being understood. By then, Sanjay Singh had left the Congress party and joined Janata Dal, which made him a political opponent of Rajiv Gandhi. Some newspapers, most notably the Indian Express under Arun Shourie, argued loudly that the investigation was a political witch hunt, that the CBI was being used by the Gandhi government to neutralize a rival. Shourie ran a sustained campaign defending Amita and Sanjay. The defense team assembled for Sanjay and Amita was formidable too. Ram Jethmalani, then one of the most celebrated criminal defense lawyers in India, led it. His daughter Rani Jethmalani argued alongside him.
How does it happen that this man finds himself at the center of every controversial case ever. Mr. Jethmalani, a formidable and infamous lawyer that I had the honor to be felicitated with a Best Debater award that I can't stop gloating about. The point being that he has a knack of picking cases and being God's chosen devil's advocate. He's Satan's chosen devil's advocate. To me, he's like the Indian Alan Dershowitz. I mean, it's remarkable.
Absolutely. I think obviously there is something to be said about the fact that everyone deserves representation. Even people who the public perceives to be guilty deserve representation, and good representation at that. But there is also something to be said about a single lawyer who, for some reason, always happens to find himself on the wrong side of the battle, or I guess the perceived wrong side of the battle. I think if Rakesh Maria is that hero that shows up in multiple of our stories, Ram Jethmalani is kind of the opposite side of the coin, where he also shows up in multiple of our stories, but just what feels like on the wrong side of history every single time.
And it is worth pointing out to our viewers that Mr. Jethmalani didn't find himself taking up these cases as happenstance. The risk-reward ratio when you are the devil's advocate are quite high. The monetary benefits, and Mr. Jethmalani was rolling in dough for what it's worth. So, he was defending the indefensible, and he got paid very well for it.
Now, this defense team's strategy was straightforward in its logic. They did not need to prove that Sanjay and Amita were innocent. They only needed to establish that the evidence produced by the CBI was insufficient to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The diary, Rani Jethmalani argued, reflected nothing more than a disturbed mind. Not an affair, not a motive, just the writings of a woman in a troubled marriage using fantasy as a form of emotional release or domestic conflict. The love letters proved an emotional connection, but an emotional connection, even a physical one, is not the same as a conspiracy to commit murder. The letters from Amita's mother and Syed's own letters were circumstantial at best, inadmissible conjecture at worst. None of it, said the defense, constituted evidence of conspiracy. And the court, the trial court, the High Court, and then the Supreme Court agreed. And so in September 1990, the trial court in Lucknow discharged Amita and Sanjay Singh from the case. The reasoning was that the evidence established motive, perhaps, but motive alone is not sufficient to frame charges of conspiracy. There was no direct evidence that Sanjay had issued an order to kill. There was no evidence that Amita had participated in or approved of a plan to murder her husband. The diary said what it said, but her explanations for it could not be disproved. The chain ran from Pappu the shooter up to Akhilesh Singh the handler, but the link from Akhilesh to Sanjay Singh could not be proved to the standard required. Once Amita and Sanjay were discharged, the chain began to unravel almost mechanically. Akhilesh Singh, the alleged middleman, challenged his continued prosecution on the grounds that with the main conspirators out of the case, there was no surviving motive attributable to him. And the trial court agreed again. The High Court agreed again. And the Supreme Court, agreeing again, in a 2004 judgment dismissed the CBI's appeal and confirmed Akhilesh's discharge. That's 3 out of 7 gone. And then the blows to Saeed's family just kept on coming.
That makes no sense to me. I can understand from a legal standpoint why motive is not sufficient to prove somebody guilty. Right? Motive needs to be connected with a modus operandi, needs to be connected with witnesses. And so if you're acquitting the couple of orchestrating the murder because why there is motive for bad marriage, but there's nothing else to prove, I get it. I don't agree with it in terms of I have my own biases here, but I believe a firm believer in guilty beyond doubt, reasonable doubt. And so, sure. But Akhilesh being acquitted under the reverse argument, which is that there is evidence that he murdered, but there is no motive. That's not how that works. There are so many cases that we have covered and cases that we are about to cover where the murder is obvious and the murderer is obvious, but motive isn't there, and the court doesn't necessarily need a motive to punish them or find them guilty. The motive may help dictate what the punishment will exactly be, if it's premeditated or crime of passion. Like in the Pramod Mahajan case that we'll be covering soon, the Supreme Court's final verdict was that yes, there was a murder. Yes, we know who the murderer was. Hey, we don't know what the motive was. That didn't mean that the murderer was let go. I have no understanding of why this was done.
I agree. It's a really absurd argument, and I think the precedence that it sets is really, really tricky, where just because you are unable to join the dots of motive that are running within someone's mind at the time of murder, yet there exists evidence to completely be able to charge them. I think that precedence is really tricky. What I will say is maybe, just maybe, there is a possibility that we don't know the full picture from the reports that the research comes from. Maybe that detail isn't publicly available. Is that link between Akhilesh and the shooters, is it not as clear cut as some of the reports have made it out to be? Which is why when the courts realize there isn't even a motive, even that link is kind of shaky. Maybe he is to be discharged. Or is this just a pure case of, okay, that logic makes no sense? I guess we don't know. But yeah, it's absurd. Amar Bahadur Singh, one of the two shooters, the man who had fired alongside Pappu at the stadium gate, was released on bail during the trial. He was then shot dead under mysterious circumstances. Both he and Amar Bahadur were from Rai Bareli, Akhilesh Singh's home territory. Another accused, Balai Singh, died during the course of the trial. Jitendra Singh, the driver, was acquitted for a lack of evidence. Let me put those two details side by side and ask you something directly. Two of the men who carried out this killing, two men who could, if they had chosen to cooperate with the prosecution, potentially have traced the chain of command upwards, were shot dead and died respectively after being released on bail from the same part of Uttar Pradesh as the man who allegedly hired them. I'm not going to tell you what that means, but I want you to think about it. And make no mistake, this isn't a question I'm alone in raising. This is a question journalists and common people from all over India asked when the men died the way they died. By the end of it, the only person convicted of anything in connection with the murder of Syed Modi was Bhagwati Singh alias Pappu, the one shooter. He was found guilty on the strength of Premchand Yadav's eyewitness testimony, which the court found credible and consistent. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in August 2009, 21 years after the murder. The Allahabad High Court upheld the sentence in June 2022. The Supreme Court dismissed his appeal in January 2023. And so today, he is still in jail. One man, the man who pulled the trigger, convicted on the basis of a single eyewitness and sentenced more than 2 decades after the act. Everyone else, the alleged orchestrator, the alleged co-conspirator, the alleged middleman, the other shooters, were either acquitted, died, or were murdered. Now here is everything that happened after the case against Sanjay and Amita was dismissed. In 1990, the same year they were discharged from the murder case, the Rajiv Gandhi government gave Sanjay Singh a Rajya Sabha nomination. He went from being arrested as a murder suspect to being seated in the upper house of parliament in the same year, under the same government that had ordered the CBI investigation in the first place. The political acrobatics involved in that sequence of events are not subtle. Shortly after being acquitted, Amita Modi married Sanjay Singh. She formally moved into Bhupati Bhavan, the 450-year-old royal palace in Amethi. The marriage received front-page coverage across India, not with celebration, but with a kind of stunned recognition. The woman who had been charged with conspiring to kill her husband had married the man who had been charged with ordering the killing, in a palace, in the open, and the country watched. That is when Garima Singh, Sanjay's first wife, the woman who had written the letter to her husband confronting him about the affair, went to court, arguing that the divorce between her and Sanjay was fraudulent, and both the Allahabad High Court and the Supreme Court agreed with her. The divorce was declared null and void. Sanjay Singh accepted the ruling but denied arranging the fraud and continued to maintain that Amita was his legitimate wife. And so Garima continued fighting. And then in 2017, this story reached a chapter so strange, it literally sounds like it's been invented. In the Uttar Pradesh State Assembly elections, both Garima Singh and Amita Singh contested from the Amethi constituency. The BJP fielded Garima, the Congress fielded Amita. Both women declared Sanjay Singh as their husband in their respective election affidavits. Two official government documents filed in the same election from the same constituency, naming the same man as their spouse. Garima won by 5,065 votes. Aryan, what the hell?
Did Dharma make a BoJack Horseman for India? Because this would be the plot.
Who is the BoJack Horseman? Is the real question? But my God, what in the absurdity? There are points in this case and multiple points where I'm just going, what? It's
Mr. Hussain Zaidi from the Election Commission, where are you when we need you? Because this makes no sense. Only in India will you get two female contestants for a single constituency claiming a monogamous relationship with the same man, and the man is accused of a murder. So, this doesn't make any sense.
Bewildering, absolutely absurd, comically absurd, tragically absurd, but absurd on all fronts. Now, Syed Modi's daughter Akansha, the child whose paternity Syed had questioned, the child who was 2 months old when she was shot dead, was adopted by Sanjay Singh and given another name. Syed Modi's name has been entirely erased from his bloodline. His daughter does not carry it. His grandchild, the one who now reportedly learns to play badminton at a Lucknow stadium, does not know him as a grandfather. The only place his name survives in the family sense is in Arabic, on a stone in Gorakhpur that his brother visits several times a year. There's also a book. A former CBI officer wrote a book titled Shuttlecock Investigation, the Syed Modi murder case. The existence of that book became the subject of separate court proceedings when it was alleged that the publishers had approached Amita's daughter about it. So it was clear that the case files of this murder did not rest in a drawer. They kept finding their way back into daylight because the country did not just want to forget. And in 2019, a Z5 series called The Charge Sheet, Innocent or Guilty, recreated the case, changing the sport from badminton to table tennis, changing the names, insisting any resemblance was coincidental, and introduced the story to a whole new generation of viewers who had no memory of 1988. The showrunners did not call it the Syed Modi case, but they didn't have to. Everyone who had lived through it recognized it immediately. Now, there's a specific kind of frustration that comes with a case like this one, and I've been trying to name it properly since I finished writing the script. It's not the frustration of not knowing what happened. If you put the evidence together, the diary, the letters, Garima's letters, Said's own letters about his impending end, the affair that everyone around them acknowledged, the fact that the two accused people married each other within months of being acquitted, the picture that forms is not ambiguous. Is it enough for them to be behind bars? Probably not. I don't think so. But is it enough for suspicion that doesn't rest easily, generation after generation? Absolutely. But I want you to remember this. The one thing I want you to remember from this episode is this. His name was Syed Modi Hassan Zaidi. He was from Sardar Nagar, Gorakhpur, Uttar Pradesh. His father worked in a sugar mill. His brothers pooled their money so he could train. He beat Prakash Padukone at 18. He was 25 years old. He had a habit of stopping for chai after practice. And we all, as a country, lost him too soon for reasons we still don't fully understand 40 years later. If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Karak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.